If you'd like to open the chat and provide your name and where you're from, we greatly appreciate it. We have Nola, Marion, and Marilyn Struthers working the chat throughout the program. So it's great to see you all here today. I would just ask if you keep yourselves on mute throughout, but we, as I mentioned, Nola and Marion will be monitoring questions in the chat as we go along. Chat starting to fill up nicely. If you're able to, please keep your camera on so we can see you. Getting to see some familiar faces. We'll just give it a few more minutes to everybody be able to join. Yeah, anybody. If anybody feels inclined, please even put in the chat what you're hoping to take away today, what you're hoping to learn. Okay. Three more minutes. Just so people know when they join, this program is going to be recorded. And then a link will be posted to the Institute webpage in case some people who weren't able to attend for different reasons can view it later, or as sometimes the information can be received is a lot and people want to be able to go back and review it. Can be very helpful. And still have people joining. Marilyn, is there anyone else in the waiting room?
Yeah, I'd give it another sec, June. They're still coming in.
All right, thank you. Nice to see we have people joining from outside of Grey County. Some people from Simcoe, we have a couple people from Toronto. I see we have the Repair Cafe. If we have any glitches, we'll call on Barry. One more minute. We start.
Yeah, I think we're mostly in, June.
Okay, so thank you. Just like again to extend a very big hello and welcome to all of you. My name is June Porter. I'm a board member of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay, a volunteer member of the Social Finance and Affordable Housing Group, and a counselor in the town of Blue Mountains. And I'd like to begin by doing a land acknowledgement. Is the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay acknowledges the longstanding presence of the First Nations on the lands we are gathered on from wherever we are joining from today. and we're thankful for their ongoing traditions that may help us all live in a better way as land stewards and neighbors. We aim to support these traditions and welcome discussions to learn on how we can do better. We appreciate, I do, and I know the Social Finance and Housing Group does, the support of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay in hosting today's important event, which speaks to its shared vision, which is harnessing the power of people and place in Southern Georgian Bay to grow social, environmental, and economic prosperity and create a resilient, equitable, and sustainable region by connecting people, sharing knowledge, and nurturing collaboration, which is really why we're here today, to achieve a common goal of affordable housing for all. I would like to acknowledge the support of Marilyn Struthers, Nola Marion, Jess Holmes of Lip Service, and Anne Finley Stewart of the Hub for her help in her promoting this event. That's been very helpful. Today, we're gathered to hear the work of the Social Finance and Housing Group and building on the first event, which introduced the growing field of community wealth as a new powerful financial tool to deliver affordable housing. Today, we're going to focus on the mechanics of leveraging community wealth. And I'm going to move along and introduce Stuart Reed, who will be our next speaker. He's a graduate of York University in Toronto and joined Community Philanthropy Movement in 2016 as Executive Director of the Community Foundation of Grey Bruce. Reed has over 33 years leadership experience in nonprofit sector in both Ontario and Saskatchewan. He is an award-winning writer and a registered yoga instructor. He is an active community builder and volunteer in Grey Bruce and is a member of the Canadian Crafts Foundation. Reed enjoys hiking on the Sydenham sector of the Grey Bruce Trail near his home in Anaheim, Ontario. And I introduced Stuart because maybe people weren't here on event one when Stuart was one of our panelists. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, June. I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Can you see that? My role today, I was invited to kind of bring our guests up to speed on our journey with the Institute's Social Finance and Learning Circle. And it's been a very impactful and resonant journey for all of us that have been participating. And I think you're going to hear through the conversation tonight how that dropping the stone in the pond has had ripples widely beyond just our shores of Georgian Bay over to Lake Huron and right across Ontario as we build partnerships and share learning with other communities across the region as well. So we began back in 2023 with the release of a Vital Focus on Housing report our foundation put out, looking at the growing housing crisis and kind of supplying data on how we were faring in Grey Bruce particularly. That document was a great kickstarter of conversation, and the Institute's umbrella extended and invited people that were interested in talking about the commodification of housing and the impacts of the commodification of housing to come together. And we did that, and we've been meeting monthly, if not more frequently, since then. So it's been over 3 years. The circle kind of evolved from that initial conversation into much more of an educative research and community building circle around the social finance tools that we saw emerging and looking at ways for our communities to help themselves. I think one of the early observations we had was that in terms of the housing crisis, we didn't see government wasn't coming to save us. We were going to have to come up with mechanisms and ways to institute change and solution making ourselves. And that's always been a tenet of what we've done together. And that's evolved into what we're calling a whole community approach that we're shepherding, where we are looking at our whole ecosystem and then working together to try and maneuver and create new entities to fill in gaps and to kickstart opportunities for market housing and affordable housing for more and more people across the area where we live. The graph or the infographic on the screen now sort of points out one of the key findings in our mapping of that ecosystem, that there were key elements that we learned from other communities from across Canada. And I should have said we did sponsor a number of very public, high-profile events where we heard presentations from other groups from across the country where they were coming up with solutions related to social financing and cooperatives and land trusts, and that mode of learning really pointed out to us the kind of ecosystem that we were dealing with here, and some of the elements that we see as integral to healthy architecture that's going to support more affordable housing in the future. And those circles are a land trust charity to receive and disperse donations of funds and property. In the upper right, CDNOP, or Community Development Entity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Regional Affordable Housing Tables, bottom left, and those have been activated, and we have a number, I think 5 or 6 of them that meet monthly across the region. And then a community wealth strategy, which this event really forges ahead a little bit more about conversation and education around what that can be for our area. One of the big accomplishments of our circle has been the municipal housing toolkit that is available on the Institute's website. And if you're not aware of that, I urge you to dig in, and you can see a lot of our source data and research has been documented in that resource and shared widely. Let's see if I can. Sorry, I'm just gonna. So community wealth building. Oh. It moved ahead very slowly. Community wealth building is the topic for this evening. And what is community wealth building? I get very excited about it because it's really the toolkit and the mechanisms that are going to help us to retain assets and build wealth locally, and to find ways of creating affordable housing while still keeping the profits and the equity working in our community. We want to bring more and more people onto the home ownership spectrum. We want to retain profits from the building and the equity that's developed through real estate in our community. And a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about tonight are about that effort. And it aligns so beautifully with the Community Foundation model. Our Community Foundation Grey Bruce manages community assets and grants for community wellness through our various programs, but we also are, as we learn, a nimble mechanism to support community wealth building as we move into this new sphere of housing development. Our community wealth strategy, there's a definition on the screen from CLES about an approach to economic development that changes the way that our communities function, retaining more wealth and the opportunity for the benefit of local people. And if you do a little bit of reading, it's a wonderful thing to Google and dip in. This is a thing that's resonant right across the globe. There are 5 pillars that are cited of community wealth building. Plural ownership of economy, number 1. So encouraging small enterprise, social enterprise, co-ops, municipal ownership of assets. So bringing things back into public ownership, making financial power work for local places. That's a great statement. So finding ways to recirculate wealth and kind of retain wealth in community, like I was describing previously. Fair work and labor markets. So the effort to provide living wage and meaningful employment and local recruitment to support the industries around housing and all industries. Progressive procurement. So finding ways to spend money locally, to create circular economies, tapping into local supply chains in the work that we're doing together. And also, finally, number 5, socially productive use of land and property. So really trying to think about ways that we are retaining and caring for land and real estate in a sustainable way that is also preserving those assets for the benefits of the commons. So bringing them back into the public sphere. And just to recap, Marilyn was mentioning, I did present at the last meeting, and I talked a little bit about how philanthropy is responding to some of the challenges we're seeing related to the housing crisis. And this is just a recap of the slides I went through, but we are advocating for systems change. We've talked about that at at our circle as well, that this is a systems problem that needs to be shifted. We're looking for place-based solutions, so things that we can do locally with the existing infrastructure that we have. We're also talking about building more of trust-based philanthropy. So really listening to what our community needs and trying to give organizations what they need so that they can do their work effectively and resonantly. Bridging gaps for not-for-profit developers and community-based housing. So we realize that there are gaps in the system of funding, trying to find ways to fill those gaps to get things off the ground and ignited so that they move ahead to fruition in terms of project development. We are looking, and this came out of our vital signs report, we need new kinds of collaborations, new partnerships, more people around the table working together to really forge the way forward. And as always at the Community Foundation, we're thinking about the long game too. So it's not just about immediate wins, but really how we're instituting mechanisms and ways of working that are going to sustain our community in the years to come. And I've talked a little bit about what the foundation's been doing, but in response to some of these challenges and opportunities, we're expanding our knowledge about social impact investing. Our foundation now is investing 1% of our assets under management in local projects, supporting social enterprise, buying community bonds, holding mortgages for cultural pillars in the community. We're also expanding our toolbox of social finance tools and exploring community bonds. And tonight we're going to hear a little bit about that from our friends from Tapestry, Stephanie. We're also incubating, as you know, a community development corporation, which is going to be additive and catalytic, hopefully, bringing social finance tools to some of the local projects, encouraging not-for-profit development, finding creative ways to facilitate partnerships and collaboration that I've mentioned as well. And more and more we hear about the gaps in initial funding, that kind of pre-development cost that CMHC is not funding anymore with seed funding. So we're looking for ways of creating perhaps a regional fund for housing, a capital fund, maybe a revolving fund where we could lend and catalyze some of those opportunities that we see as we begin to converse and learn about who's out there and who's doing what. And again, partnerships are a building block for all of this work. And we also have the opportunity to reach out and engage our network. Community Foundation Grey Bruce is a beneficiary of 207 colleagues across the country, and we learn a lot from our peers, what's happening in large cities and even smaller communities than ours. It's been a great boon to our efforts. And so tonight, I'm very excited, as I'm sure you are, about the speakers that we're going to hear from. Setting the stage, we're going to listen to Audrey Jamal, who's an academic, and Audrey's had a lot of engagement with Community Foundation model, researching social finance activation across Canada. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. And Ben Miller from the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network has a great knowledge about kind of the modeling of organizational development and capacity that can really help us have confidence in expanding what we're doing and digging in a little bit deeper in some of the ways that we can. And Stephanie Pinnington from Tapestry, we're really looking forward to hearing Tapestry's take on the community bond model. And we know that they're definitely a leader in that kind of activation in communities right across Canada. So I thank you for that, and I'll turn it back over to June.
Thank you, Stuart, for that. Really appreciate that great overview and really demonstrating how the Community Foundation Grey Bruce is evolving over time and really pivoting to meet the changing needs of our community in all the community economic challenges and that we face. So we're going to begin speaking and hearing from our first speaker, which is Dr. Audrey Jamal. She is Assistant Professor, Department of Management, and Associate Dean of Strategic Partnerships and Societal Impact at the Gordon S. Long School of Business and Economics at Guelph University. And as Stuart has mentioned, she's going to let us see how the landscape of local economics is changing and where innovation is, and what role municipalities, not-for-profit organizations, and private individuals play to ensure our communities thrive. Look forward to hearing you. Please go. Please go ahead, Audrey.
Thank you. Nice to be here with all of you. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. And Stuart, I loved your presentation. I have so many things I'd love to chat with you about. I'm going to share my slides. And I'd love to chat with you a little bit about sort of this concept of community wealth building. And when I moved to Guelph in the early 2000s, I needed a job. I wasn't in the academy yet, and I had been running nonprofit organizations. And I started to run the BIA in downtown Guelph. And when you run a BIA, which is a business improvement area, you have to get to know what's happening in your community. So the first phone call I made, some of you might recognize on this slide, was to the Bookshelf. And the Bookshelf is a locally owned business in downtown Guelph. And I called the owner and I said, what do I need to know? And what was so interesting about that conversation is that it sparked something and a question that I've had with me probably through all of my career since and all of my research. And the conversation went something like, when something didn't exist in our community, we got together with some other people and we built something else. So we had a bookstore and we added a cafe. We needed a cinema. We found a way to do that. We added food and music into the mix. So it was this idea of kind of taking back the economy. And then I kind of became obsessed with this question that has stayed with me and continues to form my research agenda, which is how can we build more sustainable and equitable communities? And the reason I ask that question is because where I get to in my thinking is that we all have a responsibility. I don't have the answer, but I think the thesis is that it exists across all of these pillars. And I teach a course in sustainable cities, and I have business students, I have engineers, I have artists, and everybody kind of comes in with their perspective, and everyone gets into their corner. And I say, wait a minute, we need to actually work across these groups and disciplines. And I bring in speakers, and we have conversations across the sectors about how do we build places. So this is kind of the question that I've been obsessed with, and this is why I'm kind of jazzed to talk to this group today and to the Institute for the great work you're doing. I'm going to share a couple of case studies I've been working on, some of the research we've been doing, and really just kind of throw out a challenge to so many of you folks who are leading in your communities. I know we have business representatives, we have government folks, we have community leaders, and people who just want to help. And I love this book, and I often use this quote. It's New Localism, and it's this idea that communities are really on the front lines, right? We know the challenges. We see them on our streets every day. We see them happening in our neighborhoods. We know the challenges that our communities are facing. But I love this quote where it says, power belongs to the problem solvers, because lots of us have sat around tables. I'm here at the University of Guelph today, and I've sat around tons of tables in my community where we've been trying to figure things out. And sometimes we're all looking over our shoulders, wondering who's coming to save us. And I wrote that down when Stuart said, the government's not coming to save us. We're all kind of here to save ourselves and work across those three pillars. So just so you know who I am and where I come from, I work at Lang, which is a business school at the University of Guelph. We're newly named, and our benefactor has challenged us to use business as a force for good. So what an amazing opportunity we have to work with businesses in all of their iterations in order to make a better world. So we try to bring these ideas into the classroom. I'm an urban planner by training. I've done nonprofit leadership, and now I'm teaching and researching, and all of my research is framed through a community wealth building lens. A few of the projects that I'm working on now, and I saw Ellie here. Hi, Ellie. Ellie's working with us also on scaling the community bond market in Canada, which is a SSHRC-funded project. We're doing lots with rural communities at the University of Guelph. We have our roots in agriculture and small and rural communities. Lots around community benefits agreements. I'll talk about that. Rural community development and kind of some of those mega infrastructure projects that are coming to town across the country right now, how communities are responding. And I'm also looking at social finance now and supporting the work of Impact Guarantee. It's just so you know who's talking to you. I'd be remiss if I didn't take you back in time before I can take you forward in time to frame how we've landed at community wealth building. I have a history minor, and I always take students into the archives. I say, like, we got to go back to understand. Historically, we've built our economy with two pillars, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but we've had government and we've had businesses, and we've left community out of the conversation. And a lot of that was kind of going back into early industrialization. We built lots of factories, and we saw that boom bust cycle in our communities. Companies rose, companies fell, people lost jobs. So that smokestack chasing legacy sits with a lot of us, especially in smaller and mid-sized communities. What we know about that approach to historic economic development is that it's left a lot of people behind. It's left places economically vulnerable, and it's had significant impacts on the environment. I only pick on my own town. These are pictures from Guelph of Imico, which was a foundry, and also sort of those brownfield or sites that are left behind with a lot of contamination in them. Fast forward, the story gets better, and these are also pretty pictures of Guelph. We started to see an evolution in economic development, right? We started in the 21st century, in those early 2000s, looking for more inclusive approaches, less about sort of economic growth, maybe a little bit more focused on quality of life and quality of place. The nice part about that, which kind of lays the foundation for community wealth building, is that we started to see more actors get involved, and that's sort of like a political science term, and that's folks like us, right? Community groups, residents associations, people who cared about their community, getting more involved in the work of community wealth. Fast forward now to a little bit where we are, our colleagues at the Democracy Collaborative, and that's really worth a Google in the States and also in the UK, coined this term community wealth building. And I love it because I feel like it's almost, and I'd love to chat about this, politically agnostic. It's about this idea of keeping wealth sticky and keeping wealth in place. So I'll show you some pictures because words are heavy but important. It's about how do we, and Stuart spoke so beautifully to this, how do we democratize our economy? How do we share back the benefits of what we have with the people that live there? How do we democratize our assets? How do we coordinate across all of those sectors? So I love this idea, and in all of my research, I'd be like, oh, this is a great project. This is a great project. But what community wealth building does across those 5 pillars is it takes ideas from across the 5 pillars, connects them, and then scales them up, which means it grows them into a movement. And I think this is the opportunity that we all have ahead of us now. So it's this idea of a systems changing approach to economic prosperity. I won't go through the 5 pillars again, but I've highlighted a couple that I think are really relevant to the work the Institute's been doing. And I've been following the work. I've connected with Marilyn a few times, and I just absolutely love the work that you're doing. I'd love to chat more about it because I have some interesting parallels with Prince Edward County, and I'll talk to you about some of the work we've been doing there. But it's this idea of working across those 5 pillars together is where you build impact. So locally rooted finance, fair, just work, just use of land and property, and progressive procurement. And I'll talk about examples of those as we kind of step through to try and bring them a little bit to life. So the Democracy Collaborative uses this idea of a wedge. I always think a picture says more than I could ever read. Like, so this idea of, an extractive economy is one where the money heads out, right? Heads out of town, heads internationally, and it benefits people that don't live in our communities. So they talk about these pillars as forming a wedge in the economy, and places around the world are experimenting with them. Our colleagues in Scotland just passed a really important bill recently. We're seeing the Community Wealth Building Act, I think it's called. I had it in my other notes, and it's going to be fun to watch that roll out and see its impact around the world. Okay, we're in Canada now, and we're in an elbows up moment. We've all been following the movement since the tariffs have been put in place. Recently, the provincial government, for many of us, I see colleagues from across Ontario, have put in place a Buy Ontario Act, which is about procurement and working collaboratively with Ontario businesses. We've also seen some federal government movement on this idea of business owners selling businesses back to their employees. So that idea of an employee ownership trust. Lots of conversation over the last few years about the Social Finance Fund, and tons of emerging community leadership. So we've got some great groundwork being laid here in our country. But we know the challenges have never been greater. And I don't need to tell you folks this, we all know it from walking around our towns. Economic diversification is needed. Infrastructure is costing us a ton of money. We have aging and declining populations, especially in many smaller communities. We all need libraries and parks and great social infrastructure. And of course, both the climate and the housing crisis are top of mind for all of us. I like this picture too. I think Zita Cobb from Shorefast Foundation was the first one to introduce me to this concept of the leaky bucket, which is, where is the money going? So this question we're left with is, how do we build wealth in our community? one of the first things we need to answer is, where is the money going? So if you have a a municipal government or hospital or a big business in your community, how are they spending their money? How are they procuring resources? And are they having an impact and a benefit on local actors? I mentioned SureFast, and this is the foundation that created this idea of an economic nutrition label. Some of you may have seen it. It looks like what you'd see on the can of soup or something at the grocery store, but it really is trying to document when you make an investment or something's happening, where does the money flow? I won't dwell on it. Folks can Google this term of the economic nutrition label, but SureFast is doing some tremendous work across the country right now, having conversations about how to bring this into places to really talk about that leaky bucket idea. Where is the money going, and how can we stem that a little bit to keep more of the wealth circulating in place? Conscious of time, I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. I've had the opportunity through SureFast to be introduced to friends in Prince Edward County. And Stuart, the Community Foundation was such a central pillar of this work. They came together with the municipality, Community Foundation, and Community Futures, which is in a lot of smaller and rural communities. They invest in local businesses, and they created a new organization, but informally, like a loose network called Thrive PEC. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to understand what was happening in their community. So they brought me in as a research partner. I brought in a bunch of students. We had a lot of fun, and we had a conversation with over 400 residents and followed up with interviews, asking questions about what was on people's minds. The model we used was called asset mapping, and it's a tool I use with a lot of communities across the country to go in and kind of say, like, what do you have? What are your physical assets? What are your local building assets? What are your institutional assets? What are the things that you have already that you can build economy around? So this idea of asset-based community development coupled with a community strategy and organization has really helped. And this is an example of one of the maps that they mapped about their cultural assets, which are a really important part of the economy. The community got together after all of those conversations with 400 plus people, and they talked about 9 priorities. I think there are 9. I didn't number them. I think it's pretty good. And you'll probably in your communities feel some resonance with some of them. They're certainly dealing with tourism. They're dealing with an affordability crisis. They're dealing with a lack of social infrastructure. So they kind of got together and mapped their community priorities, and they said, this is what we're going to work on. So the Thrive process, that Thrive PEC group that got together, this is just sort of a quick visual of how they organized themselves. They formed, they talked, they mapped, they reported, and they've created these incredible priorities. What that means is that now they're cultivating partnerships across those 3 sectors that I sort of identified at the beginning: business, government, community. They're bringing education to the community, much like what we're hearing the Institute's doing. They're raising the conversation. They're complicating the conversation. They're adding nuance and important facts into the conversation. And they're saying, we are now going to do community benefits agreements. We have so much development coming to town. It's obviously a very well-known Ontario destination for tourism. And that's meant that housing has become really expensive, and there's a lot of new development happening. So we're working collaboratively now on what we call a CBA toolkit. And a community benefits agreement is an agreement either between a municipal government and a developer, or sometimes a community group or a developer. It's worth a Google to sort of see. There's lots of great networks. There's one in Toronto. There's community benefits networks in Windsor, Essex. They've done a great one there too with the Gordie Howe Bridge. It's really this idea of how do we actually shape what we need as a community when development comes to town, so that we can articulate that and ensure that that's enshrined in the contract. We've also been doing, I'm almost done. We've also been doing case studies with mid-sized cities across the country. We did this project in Ontario, and we talked to, we've been trying to surface what's happening in place to build the local economy. And we learned so much in just going out and talking to people. We see these 4 mid-sized cities that I've kind of listed here in Ontario, and we've noticed something, and my colleague from the Ontario Nonprofit Network would probably talk more about this. Nonprofits are leading the way. They are really important economic actors in communities. They're leading the way on things like community kitchens and decent work charters. They're launching community bond campaigns that I know Tapestry will speak about, and they're helping shape those community benefits agreements like the ones we talked about in Prince Edward County. but they're facing a lot of challenges. And I'll wrap up by just saying, part of what I think our responsibility is, and I feel this in the role I sit in because I'm one of those kind of academic practitioners, and I know many people wear multiple hats, is that, we all have a responsibility to elevate the conversation, recognize that we're all in charge of the economy. It doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to all of us. We need to find ways to eliminate the gatekeeping that happens sometimes with anchor institutions, governments, and we need to find ways to seed some funding into community projects. I did a really cool presentation with a lot of mayors and CAOs last year, and I talked to them about how municipal governments can help. And it was all women leaders, so it was a great room of women, and we were talking about how can municipal governments help. And so I've added this slide because I think we have a lot of municipal colleagues here who really can help lead the way. Lots of municipal governments put an economic development plan together. They can create those enabling conditions, they can make seed investments, they can look at surplus assets, and they can really help make connections and support communities. So what's next is more research and partnerships across the pillars. I'd love to work with someone on creating one of the first made in Canada community wealth building action plans. I know that's what Scotland's going to be rolling out. And I'd really love to collaborate and find ways for more municipalities to embed community wealth building into their economic development planning. So Marilyn, I hope that's given you and June a sense of some of what's happening. I've tried to keep it as short as possible, but really happy to have been part of this conversation, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And we're just a little ahead of schedule. So if you don't mind, there's a question in the chat that indicates some communities have tried community benefit policies, but have met with opposition. What powers does a municipality have that allows them to require community benefit assets that are not being contested? Like community benefit assets, we all have asset management plans, but they don't necessarily include what you're talking about. So do you have any more insight in that?
Yeah, we wrote a white paper, and whoever that is, my email's in the chat. Please send me, I can't read the chat and everything at the same time, but please send me an email and I'll send you the white paper we wrote on community benefits agreements, which breaks it down quite a bit. And you're absolutely right. There's no mandate in place. What we've learned is that early conversations with developers are really, really important, and often having a partnership between a municipal leader and a great city councilor, or a great municipal leader and a community leader very early on in the project to say, this is what our community would like, and having some kind of a convening to raise some of the issues the development might be bringing. It is a way to start saying we do things differently in our town, in our community. And what PEC is experimenting with, and I don't want to speak for them, I feel like they've adopted me a little bit and I feel very honored for that, is they're playing with this language of saying, we are a CBN network. We are a community that when you come to town, this is who we are. So that's really been driven by the community coming together and saying, if you want to develop here, this is how we work. So that's some of the strategies. And we also have a lot of the legal agreements collected. We've talked about different sort of negotiating teams that have been put together, and different strategies, places across the country and around the world. We've done it globally, have used. So I'm happy to share that resource.
So thank you very much. I think everyone would be interested. If you could email the white paper to Marilyn, then we would make sure it would get a wider audience. I'm just thinking from what you're saying is if there are a number of developers doing a development, I mean, I can think of one where we have 3 in one area. It's really challenging them to bring some community benefit collectively to the area.
It's true, June. And part of what that means is that it's an opportunity for folks to get together to talk about what the impact of that development is on their neighborhood. Could be really positive for some. There could be negative pieces for others. It could mean that really a valuable green space in the community has disappeared. It could be that a park is needed. It could be that an investment is needed in a main street as a result of another kind of development. So I'd really encourage people to think creatively about what's required in their community. And if you can sort of build some of that momentum together through conversations, and the Institute plays a really interesting role in kind of connecting people. If you have those formal and informal convening structures, they can be really helpful to elevating the voices and really showing the power of people in place.
I think there's some really good ideas. I'm also thinking if you have two developments side by side, they could merge their instead of just having funds for parkland dedication, if they could merge the land they're willing to give for parkland, then you may have something that's a meaningful space for people. So I think you've certainly sparked a lot of ideas. And if there's any other people who want to put questions in the chat as we go along, Nola and Marilyn are monitoring that. So at this point, thank you so much. We're going to move on to Ben Miller, who is a lawyer with the Ontario Nonprofit Network. And he's going to help us see how nonprofit and charitable organizations have much more ability to leverage financing for affordable housing than you or I might think. Please go ahead, Ben.
Thank you so much. And I love the question so much that I overzealously gave a bunch of answers in the chat. So I encourage people to also check those out. So thank you so much for having me part of this conversation. You guys are always having the most exciting conversations. I'm just pleased to be part of them. We just heard the kind of big picture of community wealth building, the systems aspects, the what does it look like from the vantage point of the community as a whole. I'm looking at it from the perspective of you're an organization, or maybe you're just an individual who wants or sees the need for a particular project, and you're wondering, how can you finance it? And in particular, how can you finance it in a way that keeps your project consistent with these broader values and feeding into these broader systems in a way that generates virtuous cycles, such as Stuart described? So, broadly speaking, we're going to be looking at different investment structures that are totally available to nonprofits. We're going to be looking at what nonprofits can do in terms of their commercial activities, so not just how they're financed, but how they can generate revenues in the activities they do. And then finally, we'll look at what ONN refers to as the nonprofit difference, or I would say the nonprofit advantage when it comes to trying to develop economically in a way that builds the systems we just heard discussed. And bottom line, the motivating question is, what does it look like to ensure that resources are more widely and peaceably shared? I have to give some disclaimers as a lawyer. Everything I'm about to say is general legal information. It's not legal advice tailored to your specific situation, especially in the development world. Everything is very case specific, down to even the site you're interested in developing. It's intended as a high-level overview, and I note that my particular vantage point is the law, not the other crucial considerations that go into a successful project, such as the financial considerations, the community buy-in, etc. So some key terms. When we talk about finance, there are lots of fancy models, there are lots of terminologies, different types of organizations. Before we get lost in all those, it's important to remember that there are basically three kinds of finance you might get. There's equity. This is like shares, and it means that someone's putting in money and they have ownership as a result of the money they're putting in, whatever that ownership looks like. So equity is one option. Loans are another, and there are many, many different kinds of loans. They vary based on the time scale, the interest rates, the terms under which the interest may go up or down, may be forgiven, etc. And then thirdly, gift. And this includes grants from organizations, it includes ordinary donations, it includes in-kind, includes land, money, etc. These are the three basic options. And then there are infinite variations of blending. So for example, Stuart mentioned a revolving loan fund for the pre-development expenses. Now, in a traditional market, those pre-development loans are very high interest because you've got a very high risk of will the development actually work? The whole point is it's a feasibility study. We don't know if it'll work. In a nonprofit context, what makes it feasible is often that they are loans, but they're forgivable loans. The question is, if they're forgivable loans, why aren't they just grants? The difference is this. It's a loan up until a certain condition happens, and then it gets converted to a gift. That's just one example of a hybridization of these forms to make it work for a particular need. Bottom line, you've got three simple types of things: money that results in ownership, money that results in an entitlement to be paid back, and money that doesn't result in any further rights, and an infinite mix of them. Different types of organizations include nonprofit corporations. That's about how it's structured, who has power in it. Nonprofit organizations. That's a tax term. That's about how the CRA is going to treat it. There are registered charities. Again, that's a tax term about how it's going to be its ability to receive grants from other charities and issue tax receipts. Cooperatives are about the internal governance structure. It could be share capital, meaning there could be owners, or it could be non-share capital, non-profit. The bottom line is, how do they make decisions together? And partnerships are basically just a type of contract between people. They can be between individuals, organizations, and of course the classic share capital corporation, also known as business corporations. So these are the basic building blocks. Everything we're about to describe is just mixing and matching these building blocks in different ways. My goal that you leave here today, or the next 10 or so minutes of my speaking, with two things. Number one, the understanding that it's all possible. You could get finance in any myriad number of ways. The question is, what's the right way to keep three things consistent for you? Your theory of change, meaning that you keep your operations going in a way that actually achieves the social impact you want. That you're able to sustain that effort financially, that there's an actual plausible financial basis for how you're bringing in money and what obligations you're taking on to sustain that. And then thirdly, who makes decisions at the end of the day? And this is the most crucial contribution I think the legal form makes to those broader discussions. As Audrey was saying, who owns the economy? This is a question of governance. That shows up in your bylaws. That shows up in your organizational form. Who is in charge to ensure that what you say today are your values remain your values throughout your operations? And that's a sneak preview, but I think that's the nonprofit difference. Okay, let's look at four basic structures. Debt in nonprofit, that's the most classic. For-profit subsidiaries, less common but still quite used, especially at scale. Limited partnerships with charities, far less common but good for you to know about. And fourthly, various service delivery strategies. Okay, structure number one is you take on debt. You just like you buy a house personally, you go seek a mortgage. Nonprofits can go seek a mortgage. So here's the innovative thing. Here's the new potential. The nonprofits borrow on their own terms. They set the terms. That's really what a community bond is. That's really what social bonds are intended to be. That it's the nonprofit issuing the bond or issuing the debenture, the debt, which means that they decide what's the interest rate, what is the time for repayment, under what conditions, can it go up or go down, etc. Right. So one example from Audrey's base of operation, Guelph, is 42 Carden or 10C. It's a multi-use space, and they financed it with bonds of $1,000 to $150,000. They had 140 investors, and they raised $2.3 million. Again, it's just lending. That's it. But they set the terms. Structure number two, the nonprofit creates a for-profit entity. It owns part or all of that entity, but it can invite other people to purchase shares from that entity. So even though it's a nonprofit, for the sake of this project, it can raise equity. Now, you may say that's kind of strange. Has it ever really worked? The answer is absolutely. Some of the largest and best known brands in the world, including Hershey's, including IKEA, including Rolex, including Heineken, are owned by not just nonprofits, but charitable entities. So this has not only worked, but it's worked for a long time and at international scale. And the bottom line is you're starting a business and you're just the shareholder of the business as the nonprofit. And in the real estate context, it's quite common that individual projects will be their own corporate entity anyways, in order to segregate risk, which is another practical factor important to structuring. So that's one reason why you may retain your nonprofit character and still create an entity capable of raising equity. Structure number three. And I'll just note to comment on how this relates to the broader community wealth building. In having that for-profit entity, you have an opportunity to bring others in your community. So that plurality of ownership, creating a for-profit entity is a great way to have them directly involved and receive a return. So that you're not only delivering a return to community through the housing, but actually the dividends that may be paid are also going back into members of the community. Structure number 3, limited partnerships with charities. So I mentioned that a partnership is really just an agreement. A nonprofit can enter into a partnership with a for-profit, and this is become somewhat common in the housing sector, where there'll be some kind of agreement where the nonprofit will be entitled to own or manage some slice of a broader, let's say, condo in an urban setting that they may get a floor, etc. So if there are for-profit developers, one form the community benefit agreement can take, or one benefit that could be involved, is some part of that housing is then owned or transferred to or managed by a nonprofit at non-market rates. Now, specifically, if you're a registered charity and dealing with partnerships, there are heightened concerns for you because of the risk of private benefit to the for-profit actor, which is why there's a specific exemption for registered charities participating as limited partners. It means they're not directly involved in the delivery of the business. They're just putting up some kind of money. They're limited partners they can hold up to 20%, and they need to be arm's length from the general partner. So you can't just create your partner to do this. One form this takes in community economic development is you put up, let's say, the 20% of capital, and then you expect that 20% of the project, let's say, is going to be done on a permanently affordable basis or affordable basis for 50 years or whatever it is. And then you retain rights as an owner to potentially pull out or sell that 20% at a later date if the general partner doesn't comply, etc. Structure number 4, purchasing from nonprofits. So this is a bit more idiosyncratic, but there is one very interesting example in Ontario of this, which is Options for Homes. Basically, it's where the nonprofit is the developer, and they get involved in the lending business to owners, prospective owners who are in some kind of target group, whatever the population, the priority population is. It could be local residents, it could be low income or middle income individuals, it could be from a particular identity group, etc. Now, the Options for Home model is that the individual who has some capital but doesn't have enough for a down payment puts in 5%, and then the Options for Homes, which has in many cases developed the units themselves, sells the unit to that individual, so they get the purchase price back, and they also contribute 15% of that down payment as a second mortgage to that individual. So now they're also getting interest on that 15% mortgage, and then the rest is financed through traditional lending. So that 15% becomes the revolving fund that they then reinvest in more mortgage supports for more buyers. And because they're also the seller, not only does it have a constant inflow of capital, but it's ensuring that they are selling to the kind of people that they want to prioritize. That's keeping the financial model and the theory of change together, or it makes it possible anyway. There are many ways to mix and match with this mix of you both develop and finance. Okay, bottom line, if you're a nonprofit organization doing this, you may say, well, how could we engage in all this revenue earning activity? The answer is you absolutely can, as long as you budget it on a break-even basis, which if the money is flowing back into the community on a constant basis, shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, plus, you're allowed not just a break even, but a reserve. And if you're engaged in major capital development, the CRA recognizes that quite a large amount of money is justified as a reserve for future development, for capital growth, for future renovations, etc. So you don't need to worry, oh, we can't make revenue because then we might get taxed. If you're a charity, you can make revenue through your charitable activities. So if you're specifically targeting residents who are aged or specifically have a health issue or who are in poverty, etc., the delivery of this housing may itself be charitable. You can participate as a passive investment. So in the nonprofit owns a business model, that's a passive investment for the charity. And that's the kind of thing Stuart was describing foundations are getting into in their impact investment. But this is a much more active investment strategy than just a portfolio strategy. Related business, if your development is somehow connected to your purposes in an operational way or as an outgrowth of your purposes. So the classic example is talking about anchor institutions, universities, and colleges. They develop housing for their students. And the reason they can do that and they can own that and they can earn income on it is because it supports their charitable purposes. So think what other anchor institutions might have an interest in housing. And then finally, traditional fundraising activities. The sky's the limit for charities. So what's the nonprofit advantage when it comes to feeding into these systems? The bottom line is that with a nonprofit, legally speaking, everybody is bound to put the mission first. And you can hold your directors, you can hold your officers to account for doing that under their fiduciary duties. The governance prioritizes membership over shareholders. So it's not just about because you put in a bunch of money, you get a larger say. You have the flexibility as a nonprofit to define who you want to have the say in your decision making through a myriad of different membership structures. When it comes to ownership, there is an asset lock that is unfortunately not especially strong in Ontario, but there's some asset lock. It's even stronger for charities that helps to ensure in the long term that it stays in the mission and doesn't get extracted. And then finally, there are tax advantages to these doing these through a nonprofit entity. And since a lot of these projects exist at the margins, they either rise or fail at the margins, those tax advantages can be quite important. So that's it. That's all I've got. I'm happy to take questions when we have the time for questions, and I'll share my email in the chat.
Thank you very much, Ben. Appreciated that. Thank you for putting your email in the chat. And I'm just gonna, Marilyn, Nola, I didn't see any questions in the chat before we move on to the next speaker, in case I missed one.
I didn't see one yet either, but I do have a question for Ben.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of nonprofits and charities that I know are pretty anxious about moving into debt or taking part of, these kind of financial activities because it seems more like a business. But I think that's something we might, given your presentation, learn to think differently about.
Yeah, so this is what I tell. Like, for example, among the workshops I deliver is a risk management 101 workshop. Not specifically about this, but the same principles apply to this. Many people have the assumption that their job as a fiduciary is to minimize risk. It's absolutely not the case, and I'll tell you how I know this. If you were running a soccer tournament, the best way to minimize risk would be simply not to have the soccer tournament. Many things can happen in a soccer tournament. But obviously, if you're the board of a soccer tournament and you decide to close down the soccer tournament, you have not fulfilled your duties. Rather, your job is to put on that soccer tournament and to ensure that no unnecessary risks are taken. What's an unnecessary risk? It's a risk that doesn't contribute to the delivery of the overall mission, that is not reasonable as a means of furthering the overall mission. The same thing is true of business. If you have determined with just an honest assessment of your situation, your goal is to deliver housing, you've determined the only plausible way to do that is to borrow, not only is your duty is not to borrow, your duty is to borrow. If you figured out that that's necessary to deliver your mission, you borrow. You borrow in the most prudent way possible, but you borrow in the way that effectively delivers on your mission. And I think if people could just see that there is a duty to take risk, but reasonable risks, and mitigate not just all risk, but the unnecessary risk, then I feel their attitudes towards borrowing would be quite different.
Thank you, Marilyn, for that question. It is a bit of a shift because they're not usually associated with taking risks like that. So at this time, we have a question from Tanya. How do upper tier municipalities become involved or use community wealth as social infrastructure?
Well, that's a great question. I think the simplest answer to that question, and I'm not a municipal lawyer, but I have looked a bit into this. Under the Municipalities Act, municipalities have the ability to borrow, set to certain budgetary limits, but to borrow, and that includes raising money from the community, and like no other nonprofit corporations, to set the terms of that, and then to lend back out. Municipalities have the ability to lend in pursuit of any objective a municipality legitimately has. Housing is certainly one of those things. Childcare is another example where this is of interest, and I've heard some municipalities use it, for example, to support childcare development, etc. So the bottom line is you can do it. It's about figuring out how to fit that into your budget, because the way the Municipal Act is currently structured, that lending is considered an expense. But if you can offset it with borrowing that you can support from the community, then you can balance that out. So if you can figure out the finances, you have a lot of room to borrow and to lend on terms that you set.
Thank you, Ben. At this point, I think we'll move on to hear from Stephanie Pinnington, who is the Director of Growth and Partnerships at Tapestry Capital, which is very interesting when it comes to the subject we're speaking about today. So Stephanie is going to show us how a community built an organization that created a way for Canadian communities to leverage local investment through community bonds. One of the key new community wealth financing vehicles models that are supporting housing affordability. Look forward to hearing from you. Please go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, June, and thank you to all the other presenters today. I feel like very excited and energized right now because Stuart, Ben, and Audrey, you've all been speaking my language. You've probably all seen me nodding along to your presentations. I'm really excited about all of the work that's happening here today and really thrilled to be invited to share. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Growth and Partnerships at Tapestry. It's been one of my greatest joys and pleasures to be able to work with this organization, and I'm just so really energized by this work. I was part of the founding team of Tapestry back in 2018. I actually have a background in environmental science. You might think, how does someone go from environmental science to social finance? But I actually spent a lot of my early career working in the socioeconomic benefits of renewable energy projects. So much like Audrey was talking about, looking at how these large infrastructure projects can bring local benefits to communities. So thinking about skills development, contributing to local infrastructure beyond that project, and particularly I was very curious about how local ownership could improve sort of the buy-in to these projects. And that's how I sort of shifted into this space. So Tapestry, Tapestry, who are we? We are a nonprofit organization. Since Ben gave the intro to the different structures, we are actually a nonprofit, non-share cooperative. And we work nationwide to support other nonprofits, charities, and cooperatives to access capital. We help organizations turn what I call their social capital, their community engagement, into financial capital. And we do that using a social finance tool called a community bond. And I'm going to introduce what that is in a second. Today, we've worked on many, many different projects across a number of different sectors, very importantly in affordable housing, which now makes up about 80% of our work. But we've also supported projects in arts and culture and recreation, sports, education. And to date, we've helped, actually that number is no longer correct. We've helped to raise over $135 million from everyday Canadians, people like you and I, that we're standing at a number around 4,000, I think 500 now. The numbers are changing quickly, so we always have to be updating these slides. Maybe a little bit of background on where Tapestry came from, because I love our story. So when I joined, I actually joined what was called the Toronto Renewable Energy Cooperative. Renewable energy group based in Toronto. If anyone's been in downtown Toronto and driven along the lakeshore, I'm sure you've seen that one turbine, that lonely turbine at Exhibition Place. So that project was actually the first project of the Toronto Renewable Energy Cooperative. It was the founding of the organization. And there was an idea that we wanted to have wind energy in this urban setting. The vision was actually to have over 200 turbines on Lake Ontario. That didn't transpire, but that project is actually became a really powerful beacon of what is possible when community members come together and actually invest their dollars locally. So that project was co-financed by 600 community investors and is co-owned with Toronto Hydro. So while that project didn't pan out in the way that we initially hoped it would, it did create this, I guess, use case of how we could bring community projects to life using community investment. And the organization went on to incubate and support one of, I actually think it's North America's largest renewable energy cooperative now, called SolarShare. And they now own and operate 52 solar projects across Ontario. Just to give you an idea, their first community investment raise was for only $122,000. They've since done a number of very, very large raises and taken in over $80 million in community investment to bring those projects to life. We went on to work on other types of renewable energy projects. But in 2012, we were approached by an organization that had a really interesting idea to purchase a building. And this was the first time that we thought, hey, could this model of having community members invest in a nonprofit work for purchasing an asset? And so that's really what led to this creation of Tapestry and this alternative financing vehicle, which I'm going to introduce you today. So we really set out to solve this one big challenge. On one side, we have really, really important nonprofits, charities, and cooperatives, which are providing critical infrastructure and services across our country. And unfairly, they face more challenges to access traditional capital than their for-profit counterparts. In the early days before we launched Tapestry, we went out and just wanted to really speak to as many nonprofits and charities as possible to understand what financing challenges they faced. And I remember vividly speaking to the YWCA in Toronto, which has millions in assets and should have no problem taking on debt. But banks didn't want to lend to them because they didn't want to foreclose on a women's shelter. So nonprofits and charities do face different challenges in accessing capital, and often are relying, like Audrey mentioned, on other people's timelines and decision making. And then on the other side, we have this growing movement, again, like Audrey mentioned, of Canadians that want to invest locally, want to support their communities, and really want to not just do less harm with their money. We've seen this big movement towards ESG investing, but not do less harm, not just divest from oil, from war, but actually invest in doing more good, seeing their dollars or make them a return, but also contribute to projects in their own backyard that they can feel and see and take pride in. So what is a community bond? Now that I've talked about all of that, a community bond, very simply, is a debt financing tool, or even more simply, a financing vehicle that allows an individual or corporation or institution to invest in a nonprofit, charity, or cooperative to provide a loan to them. So a community bond typically has a fixed interest rate and term. So here you can see in the diagram, I'll make it a very simple explanation. A community member, let's say, buys $1,000 bond. Maybe it has a 7-year term and a 3% interest payment that's going to be paid out annually. So they purchase that $1,000 bond, $1,000 goes to the nonprofit. They use that capital to fund a project, in this case, affordable housing. They bring that project to life, they have a revenue stream. So maybe that's through rent or maybe government subsidies that allows them to be able to repay investors. So they're paying that interest payment on an annual basis. At the end of that term, that 7 years, the bond will mature and that investor will be repaid that principal. Or, which happens in many, many cases, the investor, if they've received their interest payments on time, they feel proud to have invested in the project, will often choose to reinvest that capital. So why community bonds? There are lots of reasons. The first is flexibility. So, I don't really need to say it again because I think all the other speakers said it, but this is what's really unique about this model is it's the one model where the organization issuing actually gets to set the terms. They get to look at what is financially feasible for their organization, for their project. They can see, when their cash flow becomes positive, when they can begin paying out. So they get to set the terms. And that means that ultimately they can very likely reduce their cost of capital significantly. They're also really inclusive. So we see institutions investing in addition to retail investors. So minimums as low as $500 really means that many, many community members can be engaged in this. They're also engaging, allowing that participation from community members is so powerful. It's not just about the capital. It's about that sense of ownership and being able to build something together. They are efficient. So and I won't say free capital is not important. It's incredibly important. Donations and government grants are critical. But it can be frustrating for organizations to be waiting on hearing back about rounds of granting or to be, tapping into donors that are maybe fatigued from other asks. So they can be much faster. And like I mentioned, there is a growing movement of Canadians that want to invest really in their own backyards. And then they are scalable. So I mentioned the case of Solar Share, really, really scaling up significantly. And then the fact that lots of investors choose to reinvest. So about 70% of investors, once their bond matures, will choose to reinvest. So this actually creates a really powerful pool of capital that can continuously be deployed. And for an affordable housing developer, that's really critical. There's this huge demand for affordable housing. And it means that, once they've deployed capital for one project, if investors choose to stay reinvested, that becomes a growing pool of capital to tap into for future projects. Very quickly, I'll just look at what the process of raising community investment looks like. This is our process. There are organizations that have certainly done this without Tapestry support. But the process we bring organizations through is first looking at the feasibility. So do community bonds make sense for their project? We look first at their financial model and see, what amount of debt they can carry over a period of time, and if they're able to service that debt, what terms might make sense for them. And once we've analyzed that, we coach groups on how to go out to community and actually test those terms. So of course, if you're putting a financial product out to the public, you want to make sure that there's an appetite and interest among community members to actually invest in it. So those are sort of the two critical pieces, at which point organizations should have a good idea of whether this is something that would work for them. If the answer is yes, they move into a phase of structuring. So that's where we put together all the legal documents behind this offering. So We put together what's called an offering statement, quite similar to what a prospectus is, that outlines the use of proceeds, risks, risk mitigation strategies, who's involved in the project, any financial details there. And then we're also providing like the back-end infrastructure to actually be able to process those bond purchases and transactions. And then Tapestry is there through the raise period. One important thing to mention is that it's these organizations that are raising the capital. So they are going out and marketing and selling those bonds. Tapestry is certainly providing support behind the scenes, but these organizations know their communities best. They are connected to them already. And so no capital flows to Tapestry. All capital flows directly to the organization issuing. But we do provide administration services. So once that capital is raised, we provide support to organizations issuing community bonds to do all the administrative, less fun work, like providing tax forms, coordinating interest disbursements, producing reports for auditing purposes, etc. I hope I'm not going on time here. I wanted to walk through a couple of case studies, but stop me if I've gone over my limit. Still good. Okay, great. So I wanted to share one case study, which I think is really relevant to the regions that we're talking about. I lived in Southampton. I did just move to Toronto, but I know the county well, Bruce County well, and I think that this example is a nice one to showcase. So this is an organization called Places for People based in Haliburton County. This is their impact to date, and I'm going to share how they got there, but they've helped to house over 100 people to date. They have 7 families in their community who have since become homeowners after living in their affordable rental accommodation, and they currently own 20 units of affordable housing. So Haliburton County faces a lot of the same challenges that I'm sure individuals have seen in their own communities. They have a very seasonal economy, so lots of cottagers coming in who have driven up real estate prices, and it's made it's a situation where housing has become there's a really dire need for affordable housing. Before launching their community bond campaign, Places for People owned and operated 12 units in 5 different properties. So we're really having a meaningful impact in their community, given the size of their community. But they had plans to really scale and grow. They saw how dire the need was, and they wanted to take action. But they knew that they first needed to get themselves into a better financial situation. So they had different mortgages on all of those properties. And they realized that if they could consolidate that debt and bring down the cost of servicing that debt, that they could actually be in a financial position to make a major acquisition. And so that's when we began working with them. So Places for People raised $850,000 to be able to refinance those 5 properties. They are one of the quickest raises that we've ever supported, a really, really engaged community. They raised that money in just 10 weeks. And they were able to, like I mentioned, consolidate that debt and bring down their overall cost of capital by 2%, which maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but is quite significant in the grand scheme of things. And here you can see what their bond offering was that they brought to the community. So they had several different bonds structured to be available to different types of investors. And this is typically the case that we see with organizations. They want one maybe very accessible bond to broaden engagement, then maybe something at a mid-level, someone who might have a little bit more money to invest, and then typically one that would be at a higher end that might be, local businesses would be investing or foundations. And you can see how they've set the interest rates there. That was all modeled out to really work for their financial situation. And you can see here the split between retail and institutional investment and where those investors came from. So yes, 71% were from Haliburton County, but about 30% also came from investors outside, which is something that we're really seeing a lot. Investors that are not just interested in funding projects that are in their own backyard, but interested in investing in causes that are meaningful to them. And so Places for People actually got a lot of news coverage beyond their own county and had investors coming from as far as Halifax, interestingly. And here, Faye, who is the founder of Places for People, shares, this amazing outcome. So this is a county that didn't have any government-funded units since 2021. So they were doing this on their own. They weren't waiting for government to come in. I think this is the theme that's come up today. And Faye will always say, this may seem little that they added 8 units of housing, but it's significant for them. It represents a 6% increase in the total community housing stock in their community. If I have time, I can share a few more examples, but feel free to cut me off. Marilyn, give me a...
Stephanie, there is a question in the chat that's rather interesting at this point.
Okay.
Is where does Tapestry make their profit to run these investments?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So we are a social enterprise. So we are a nonprofit, but we do charge a fee for our services, like other social enterprises do. And we work as a consultancy, charging an hourly rate for our support. And so that's how we fund ourselves. We also do seek grants, like non-repayable capital to grow operations as well, and subsidize wherever possible, to be able to support a wide range of organizations and make sure that this model is accessible to anyone that wants to use it.
Thank you for that. I was just really interested in, because I know you have lots of examples, but so this, the recent case study you did, it took 10 weeks to raise $850,000. What is the longest time it has taken, and how do you gauge whether the community has an appetite for this? And I see that you have external investors, and equally, how do they become aware?
That's a great question. So the longest one, typically they don't go beyond 6 months, and every offering statement will put an end date to the capital raising period. I would say that most of the money comes in at the end. So I feel that if you set a shorter deadline and create that sort of fear of missing out, the money comes in, as long as you're doing that marketing work. I mean, Indwell's a good example here. Like, they raised $6 million. It took them 5 months to raise that capital. It varies from organization to organization. I think the key distinguishing factor is having a champion. So organizations that have a really powerful spokesperson who's kind of jazzed about what they're doing, that energy rubs off a lot. And those organizations that have that champion, they succeed and really quickly.
So it's really about building. Sorry, go ahead.
It is. No, sorry. I just wanted to answer the second part of your question, but.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe you can, I was going to say,
no, go ahead.
Could you remind me what the second part was?
It's really about how do you know that you have a community that will invest?
Yeah.
To say you have the different municipalities we have in Grey County, some are more well off than others. You also have external. How do you begin to, because I mean, obviously through the question that was asked in the chat, you are funded to take these on. How do you know, and then building on Ben's idea of taking a risk, how do you know this is you have a good chance of raising the money?
Yeah, the best way is to go out and speak to community. And we always say, if you ask for an opinion, you're likely to get an investment down the road as well. So doing that early testing So the first step is that financial modeling and seeing what makes sense for organizations. The second step is really going out and saying, does this look interesting? Do these terms work for our community? Is there enough appetite? And we always recommend doing this consultation. You know, some organizations will bring like 50, 60 community members together. Okay. And that's really like a very critical step.
So with that, just building on that, because I see we have another good question in the chat. Do you see it's a little bit like, say, a hospital foundation trying to raise money for like an MRI, which is $5-6 million. They do a lot of, because they would obviously test out donors that have donated substantial amounts in the past, etc. Would you see there's some applicable principles that way?
Yes and no. So I would say that marketing a community bond is slightly different because you want to appeal to people's like desire to do good, and that's people donate because they believe in a cause and they want to support it. But you're also promising a financial return, and individuals, investors care about that part too. They want to be given confidence that you're going to be able to repay them on the set terms. So I think it's like, yes, it is like that. But it's also sort of like how a traditional investment would be marketed as well. Yeah.
So the question we have in the chat is, has there ever been a community bond through Tapestry that has failed? And if yes, what happened?
That's a good question. So we've never had a situation where there hasn't been repayment on the bonds. We did support one organization that had to defer interest payments, but they were eventually made. It was a very complicated project, a biogas installation. There were just issues around like the timing and construction that delayed the project. It meant that they had to carry the interest payments before the project became operational. Thankfully, like the investors were very supportive and they agreed to defer those payments. So it all like worked out in the end. But there's certainly risk attached to these projects, and that's where the offering statement is really important. So the prospectus exemption that organizations actually use in order to issue debt in this way, it means they don't have to put anything forward. It's a prospectus exemption. They actually don't have to provide any disclosure to investors, but we really encourage, and our process requires it, that organizations are laying out these risks to investors, because there's risk, as in any investment, that they may not be repaid, or they may not be repaid on the terms set out. And so that's just a really important part of being transparent and disclosing that.
Okay. And we have this is a bit of a long question. They set the scene as a new not-for-profit with limited revenue and a social enterprise still in development. What financing or community investment strategies are recommended to bridge the gap to launch, and what key factors should we consider to structure a community bond that would be feasible and attractive to early investors once the program becomes operational?
That's a good question.
This is for affordable housing.
Okay, great. I mean, we've supported lots of established organizations. We've also supported lots of grassroots organizations that are just getting started. I didn't include it in my deck here, but I'd be happy to chat about it. We supported a group in Kamloops, BC called Propolis, brand new cooperative that just got started. Like, they formed the entity as we started engaging with them. So it's certainly possible for organizations to do it. I would say it's more difficult because you don't have an established community, or maybe you do. I don't know your particular situation. But having an established community really helps you, gives you a leg up to like speeding up this process. But then again, Propolis shared that it's been a really, really critical step in them building community. So it may have been more difficult, but that community that they built through this was, it wasn't just about the money. It really paid off for them in the long run. I would say there are a few considerations. So, we're working to change this, but right now, sort of with the fixed costs associated, it doesn't really make sense to do a community bond raise unless you're looking to raise $1 million or more. I'm assuming if it's an affordable housing project, you'd probably be in that area anyways. But for early stage, before you need that capital, it might make more sense to be looking for grants or raising capital through donations. But I'd be happy to chat more if you want to share your particular example.
Thank you. So there's 2 questions. I'm just looking at the time, and hopefully we can squeeze these in before we sign off. A person had asked, when a community or a social enterprise reaches out to you, do you have like a marketing toolkit to give them? So it's which is sort of the ABCs of what to do, or is it up to them? Hopefully that's a short answer.
That's great. We definitely we've done this many times, and so we have a lot of tools and templates available to make the process easier. So Tapestry will support in creating like a customized sales and marketing plan for you. We will teach you how to use a CRM system to be able to track your investors and make sure that you're not missing opportunities. So we are certainly there coaching and holding hands throughout the whole process.
Thank you. Another one is, what is an attractive rate of return that brings in investment from outside community boundaries?
Yeah,
and
is
there a potential to shop for donors more widely?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, I would say we're seeing interest rates on community bonds in the market right now anywhere between like 2 and 5%. So very affordable capital, and those are, we've never supported a campaign that hasn't reached their target. So those are selling. Those are attractive interest rates right now.
And lastly, maybe with the time, is, do community bonds have any security interest in the project they finance?
It's a great question. So often organizations will choose to secure their bonds against a physical asset. And we can support in doing that. It provides a little bit more assurance and confidence to investors that in the case of default, there would be some opportunity for them to recoup some of the principal that they invested, or potentially the interest as well. So often organizations will choose to do that. Bonds that are secured are eligible to be held in RSPs and other tax advantaged accounts. So that's another, often for organizations, important consideration, because there's that tax sheltering ability. But I would say unsecured bonds too, do sell. And so it's not often it's not a deal breaker, I would say.
So I see Ben has his hand up. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll just add one small point that I don't think is marketed enough. In the situation where an organization is defaulting, they're going bankrupt, etc. In a business corporation, you have the lenders are given priority over the shareholders, but nevertheless, in all the decisions before bankruptcy about how to structure the corporation, there's competition between the interests of the shareholders and the lenders. In a nonprofit, there isn't that competition because there aren't shareholders. So a kind of idiosyncratic advantage of the nonprofit structure is that if it does go bust, you're not competing with shareholders, and nobody, markets themselves in that way, because you don't want to market yourself based on when you go bust. But if you do have an investor who's particularly interested in this question of what security is there besides just securing against an asset, you can talk about the unique advantage of being a nonprofit.
Thank you, Ben. I see Nola. Yes, go ahead. Nola.
Do community bonds work only where there was already a stream of revenue, or would they work for let's say, for example, a not-for-profit that's developing a brand new affordable housing project. And the other, there's a second question, can the community bonds be used for the purchase of land? So I think there's two separate things there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, certainly community bonds, the use of proceeds could be to purchase land. We've supported organizations to do that before. And yes, like as long as there is a business case there, a business plan for revenue in future, there's no reason an organization can't raise community bonds. So all of that would be laid out as part of that offering statement, but there needs to be a plan in place for how you'd be able to repay investors.
Okay, I'm seeing people are beginning to leave, so I think we'll close off. A very big thank you. Sorry,
share
go
my
ahead,
email
Stephanie.
in case anyone wants to reach out.
Yes, we see Stephanie at tapestrycapital.ca. Just a reminder, it was recorded. The video link will be up within the coming weeks after. In closing, I'd just like to express a special thanks to our speakers. We've really enjoyed hearing you today, and they've certainly, as always, challenged our personal and professional paradigms. I'd like to thank you all for attending, as your interest and thought-provoking questions are certainly appreciated. And just to recap, the first event introduced the concept. Today, we've learned about the mechanics of leveraging community wealth, and certainly Tapestry has set us up very nicely for our third and final event, which will focus on how communities are actually using local community wealth to support more affordable housing development. So please save the date. You will see an advertisement coming with the Eventbrite. Be able to register. The date will be April 15th at 4:30 to 6 p.m. So save the date.